Hi, my name's Steve Walker from Promise Money, and today I'm going to be talking about EPCs, and if you're a landlord, the requirements to have one. And if you haven't got an EPC and it's not at the right rating, and the local council find out that that's the case, there are fines attached. So it's worth just watching this for a few minutes. And if you've got 10 properties, that could cost you £50,000 in fines. So let's just go back to basics. In England and Wales, you must ensure that you have an EPC performance certificate, and it's got to be rated E or higher. And this applies to properties where there are existing tenants, as well as properties where a new tenancy is being created. In accordance with the, I'll get this right, minimum energy efficiency standards regulations, and I'm not going to say that again, valuers are unable to recommend a property as suitable security where no valid EPC exists, or it has been rated as F or G. So if you own a property already, well, you need to have this in place to prevent the fines. But if you're thinking of buying a property, you need to look into the EPC. And we've been arranging mortgages for customers where right at the death, they've suddenly found out, or the valuers found out after they've paid for the valuation, that the EPC rating is low. And that can cause a problem because some lenders will insist that the EPC is put right before they will lend. And if you're buying a property, that can cause you a problem, because how are you going to get into the property if you don't own it to put the EPC right? So it's a little bit of a catch-22. So we have to watch out for that. Now, these regulations apply to all domestic private renting properties that are in an assured tenancy, a regulated tenancy, or a domestic agricultural tenancy. And if the property that you own and let has been marketed or sale or let or modified in the past 10 years, then it will probably be legally required to have an EPC. If your property has an EPC rating or no EPC, but a rating of F or G, you've got to take the appropriate action to comply with the regulations before letting it, unless, of course, you have a valid exemption in place. I will talk about those exemptions in just a moment. Now, you're not expected to throw an absolute fortune at a property in order to achieve an EPC of the required level. So they have caps in place, and you won't be required to spend more than £3,500, including VAT, on energy efficiency improvements. If you can't improve your property up to level EPC for £3,500 or less, then you need to make an application for an exemption, okay? And register the exemptions with the appropriate authorities. So the options to fund this, well, there's three basically. Option one is you can look to get third-party funding, okay? And you can go to the local authorities where you might be able to get grants or Green Deal finance. Option two could be a combination of you putting some money in yourself and third-party funding. And if you can secure some third-party funding, but it's less than £3,500, and which isn't enough to improve your EPC, you might need to top it up with your own funds to the value of the cost of the cap, which is £3,500. So option three is self-funding. If you're unable to secure any funding, you need to use your own funds to bring the property up to scratch EPC level 3, but you don't need to spend more than £3,500. So if you don't need to spend that much to get up to the level that you require, then that's fine. You can improve your property for less than the cap and you've met your obligations. But if it costs you more than £3,500 to improve the property to level E, you should install all of the recommendations that you can and the measures that you can, and then register an exemption because you can't do everything that's required. So if you've made an energy efficient improvement to your property since the 1st of October 2017, you can include the cost of those improvements within the £3,500 cap, okay? So magic numbers, 2017 October, any costs that you spent on energy improvement are within the £3,500 cap, but you don't need to spend more than that. That's when you go for exemptions. So there are various exemptions that apply. So I'll just quickly talk through those. The first one is all relevant improvements made exemption. You can register this exemption if the property is still below EPC-E after improvements have been made up to the cost cap of £3,500, including VAT, or there are none that can be made. So this exemption lasts for 5 years, and after that it'll expire and you'll need to then either apply again or make the improvements. We've then got the high cost exemption, and you're going to register this one if no improvements can be made because the cost of installing even the cheapest recommended improvements would exceed £3,500. So if it's a massive job for you to make any improvements at all and it's going to cost more than £3,500, register for that exemption. That too lasts for 5 years, and after that you'll need to register for another exemption or an extension. To qualify for that, they're not going to take your word for it, so you need to get 3 quotes from qualified installers for the measures that you would need to take to get up to level E on the EPC. An interesting one is wall insulation exemption. So you can register this exemption if the only improvements to your property that are required are cavity wall insulation, external wall insulation or internal wall insulation, and you've obtained written expert advice showing that to take these measures would negatively impact on the fabric of structure of the property of the building. Okay, so you don't have to do it if it's going to negatively impact, and you can get an expert opinion to confirm that. That exemption also lasts for 5 years. Then we've got third-party consent exemptions. So if the improvements that you're required to make require the consent from another party, such as a tenant, a superior landlord, your mortgagee, your freeholder or planning department, and despite your best efforts that consent can't be obtained, you can apply for this exemption, and that lasts for 5 years. And where there's a lack of tenant consent was the issue, that will last until the end of the current tenancy. Okay, so you can't rely on that for 5 years. If the tenant's going to leave in 6 months, you'll then have to go back through the process and get an EPC. Another exemption is a property devaluation exemption, and this basically means that if the measures that you are required to carry out could cause the property to devalue by more than 5%, you can register for this exemption, but you'll need to get a report to that effect from an independent surveyor. Now, if you are new to being a landlord, there are also temporary exemptions available because you are a recent landlord. You won't be expected to take immediate action to improve your property EPC to level E, and you can claim for up to 6 months exemption from the date you became a landlord. This exemption lasts for 6 months from that date that you became a landlord, and it will expire after that unless you've either improved the property to EPC E level or registered for another valid exemption, which would have to be a different one. Now, bear in mind, if you are becoming a landlord, this exemption might not work for you if you are buying a property, if you're taking out a mortgage to buy the property, because the lender is going to want to see that EPC is there as well. And we've had lots of situations where lenders have said, look, we're not going to complete on this mortgage until the relevant EPC is in place. And of course, you can't get into the property to do the improvements because you haven't taken possession of it yet. So there's a bit of a catch-22 there you've got to watch out for. The regulations are enforced by local authorities, and they have a wide range of powers to check and ensure compliance. So they could knock on the door at any time. And the regulations mean that since April 2018, private landlords may not let a domestic property on new tenancies to new or existing tenants if the EPC is less than E, i.e. is F or G, unless you've got one of these exemptions. So from April 2020, this prohibition on letting F and G properties will extend to all relevant properties, even where there's been no change in tenancy. So just because you haven't changed the tenancy since April 2020, you still need to have this EPC in place. And if the local authority thinks that you've failed in your obligations, then they can serve a compliance notice, and that can be served for 12 months after the suspected breach occurred. And if that is held up to be a valid notice, then penalties will apply. So that's probably what you're most interested in. Well, what are the penalties? Well, the maximum penalties apply per property per breach of the regulation, and they are up to £2,000 penalty for renting out a non-compliant property for less than 3 months. So, if you could have only rented it for 2 months, they find out that you've let it and there's no EPC, that could be £2,000. If it's over 3 months, then it's £4,000 for renting out a non-compliant property. And they can also fine up to £1,000 for providing false or misleading information on the exemptions register. So if you try and register an exemption and that's false and misleading, that can be a £1,000 fine. And up to £2,000 for failure to comply with a compliance notice. So if they tell you that you've got to get an EPC and you don't, you continue to let it, that's another £2,000. So the maximum amount you can be fined per property, however, is capped at £5,000 per property. But if you're sitting on a portfolio of 10 properties right now and EPCs aren't in place and the properties are let out, you could be looking at £50,000. And if they check up on one of your properties, the chances are that you're going to get a domino effect and they'll check on all the rest. So it's pretty significant, pretty serious. If you'd like more information on this or links to the relevant forms and the authorities on all of this, then please go to our website, Promise Money, www.promisemoney.co.uk. I don't even know the name of my own website. Please share and subscribe to our videos. And if you're not signed up to our newsletters, please pick one of the options below. So that's it. If you haven't got an EPC of E or higher on a property you're renting out or you're thinking of renting out, you need to get one because it could cost you £5,000. There's the summary. Hope you found this of interest and of value, and catch up with you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.